one of the things I've learned over 30 years is that this global cult, as I call it, this global network of secret societies, etc., that has a central leadership, it does, of course, piggyback happenings in the world that just occur to advance its agenda. Oh, we can exploit this. But one thing's been very clear over the decades, that when something emerges that has almost limitless potential to advance this agenda, and my God, has it not in the period since, then it's never something that's random and piggybacked. It's been planned. And then you look at all the evidence, which is enormous, that it was planned. First of all, the speed that it played out was ridiculous if they was just reacting to something that emerged at the end of 2019. And one of the things that I've been pointing out through all these years is the whole foundation of human control is to disconnect that level of us that perceives the five senses from other levels of ourselves. So we become isolated in five sense reality, and therefore the information we receive within five sense reality is what we have
only on becoming
to form our perceptions of reality. There's not a greater level of us that's communicating and influencing the five sense level to see that there are other ways of looking at things. There's other ways of perceiving the same situation. Instead, people become blinkered in the five senses. And that's been done over the decades and more by controlling information overwhelmingly. So how do we form our perceptions? We form them from information. If you can control the information that people receive, that's what all this mass censorship's about now, then you've got a great chance of forming through that people's perceptions of reality. So they've done it by controlling information up to this point, and to complete the job, and this is all part of this human 2.0, this synthetic biological human, you can connect the human brain to artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence then doesn't need to control information to control perception, because artificial intelligence becomes your perception. And that's what they want to do. And they're selling the idea that it will make us gods, it will make us superhuman, it will make us subhuman. That's the idea. What I've found in my life is if you do what you know to be right, things tend to happen that allow you to do that. So you think that if I do this, the consequences will be this. But if you keep doing what you know to be right, the kaleidoscope kind of moves and the consequences are not what you thought they'd be. In other words, you find there's a way around it. You find there's a way to do it. But if you don't do it in the first place, then that kaleidoscope can't move, because it's obviously going or static in its original state, where I can't change anything because these are the consequences. Well, that's going on forever then. And the kids are still going to school and they're being outrageously indoctrinated. So you see a tiny few people that are actually orchestrating all this. And once you've got one generation, particularly the generation of the teaching staff, then you've got a perpetual, perceptual programming system that runs itself, basically, where the teaching staff program the next generation, which then program the next generation. And it's a self-perpetuating perceptual indoctrination machine. And that's what they've created. The only way to break it is start thinking for yourself. And that you can do that. Everything in our reality is frequency. Even my voice now is a frequency generated by my vocal cords, which people hearing decode the vocal cord waveform information through the ear senses. It's communicated to the brain as an electrical signal, and the brain decodes it into the language that we hear. And so everything, absolutely everything is a frequency. Information that we receive is frequency. And those frequencies, represented by different forms of information, affect the brain in the way that it fires the neurons into a perception. And you can manipulate the brain. And repetition, again, is a magnificent way of doing this. And you can do it subliminally as well, even so that people don't even realize that they're being manipulated in the subconscious because they're not aware of it, to actually only read the world in a certain way.
Only on becoming supernatural.
So if you're only receiving certain information, certain type of information from sources of information, they're basically the same. We're talking the mainstream media here. And your brain becomes like, it fires, the networks fire in relation to that information. And they keep firing the same, and they keep firing the same. So your perceptions don't change because your brain's just decoding the same information into the same perception. But when you, and this is what happens when people awaken to the greater truth, the greater awareness, is they start getting access to other information, which has different frequency. The truth has a different frequency to a lie, for instance. And suddenly their brain starts to, in this brain placidity, it starts to change the way it processes information and therefore perceives the world. And the perceptions change, and they are desperate for that not to happen. Now, if I talk about firewalling the brain and repetition being a phenomenally powerful way of doing it, just batting out the same information all the time, then if you were going to do that, what would you want? Well, let's have a look. How about we get hold of kids at the earliest possible age, 3 or 4, and we put them in a system in which we control at least 5 days a week plus homework the information that they receive. And what if we give them carrot and stick encouragements to accept what we tell them rather than question it, which is what happens, of course. And then how about if we had the global media, which we also own, banging out the same perceptions and the same information 24/7. What you'll do is you will bombard the brain with a certain type of information repetitively over and over again. You will give people carrot and sticks for accepting it rather than questioning it. And if people only hear one thing, that becomes their perception. Everyone knows that, mate, is an expression of that. And so you can understand why so many people find it impossible to look at the world in a different way, because their networks of neurons won't fire in a way that will process that information. And therefore it becomes just a repetition of perception where the perception doesn't change. And the longer you succumb to this, the more your brain solidifies to just fire on that basis of that perception. And hence we have phrases like, there's no fool like an old fool, which is absolutely true.
Only on becoming supernatural.
And I say that as a 69-year-old. There is no fool like an old fool. Why? Because it means they've gone through an entire life and learnt nothing except to absorb what the system has told them to believe. And yet there are many people of advanced age who are absolutely not fools, who are very, very bright people. Why? Because they have not succumbed to the programming that so many of their fellow humans have.